welcome everybody to this episode of the Upstream podcast with Tidelift. I am here today with Annie Rauwerda and Sumana Harihareswara. I practiced that like 5 times this morning, and we've known each other for like 15 years. And
we've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know.
But it's fine.
We'll work on it. We're here today to talk about joy and human communication and apparently getting each other's names right. But I think joy and human communication are our primary themes today. And so the two folks I have with us today are people who I think have taken some things that we sometimes think of as maybe a little on the dull or the nerdy side and tried to bring to public attention or even internal attention the ways in which this stuff is fun, should be fun, can be not just like fun in sort of a wholesome, I am glad in my soul kind of sense, but in the laugh out loud funny kind of sense, which I just think is so valuable and so important, and a story that open source and open culture don't tell about themselves nearly as often as they should. So I'm very excited about today's podcast. So we'll start with Sumana, who has been involved in open source for a very long time in a very large number of ways. These days is the principal at Changeset Consulting and has a and has a newsletter on the ways in which we work with maintainers, deal with maintainers, support maintainers, and what it means to be a good maintainer. I think, did I hit all the key points there?
Thanks. I think, yeah, it's about, I would say that, I try and share a few times a year resources on certainly how to be a better open stuff maintainer, but also how to be a better partner to open stuff that you depend on. Yeah. And sometimes I share links to, my stand-up comedy about being in this open tech world and so on.
Right. I mean, so let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because there's, your day job is in some sense like, I mean, you do a lot, for example, of program management to help large projects, including a lot of stuff from the Python Software Foundation, ship software. It's this inherently fairly serious kind of thing. But then when you show up at conferences, you're certainly qualified to talk about, like, let's walk through the issue tracker. And instead, or as well as that, you're doing like, one-act plays. This is not what I tend to go to tech conferences for, but also, but what, a one-act play? That sounds awesome. Like, tell our listeners a little bit more about that.
So in my experience, we've been doing conferences in the tech industry for many years, right? Decades and decades. And one way that I described it to friends is I feel like often the presentations and the sessions you experience at conferences, they often inherit from the class academia, in the sense of, okay, there's someone on a stage teaching you something in a very expository fashion. Maybe there's sort of a workshop, which is like a hands-on lab. They often inherit from the class industry. Maybe there's a demo or there's a panel that's also somewhat academic and so on. But they very infrequently inherit from the class theater. And we have for thousands of years known what you do when you have a stage and an audience. And we know some things about how different media are good at different things. Plays and stand-up are particularly good at evoking empathy and simulating experiences so that the audience can understand why someone would have a different point of view, reflecting emotion. And when it comes to, especially the interpersonal stuff, right? Those delicate vulnerabilities and negotiations and things like that. I would say that so I also not only have done stand-up at conferences and performed in plays at conferences, but I also a few years ago co-created a play festival of performance art at the big Python conference, PyCon US 2019. And in the call for performances there, we said, like songs and cartoons, narrative art can encapsulate wisdom in stories and characters and use entertainment value to help audiences retain that wisdom. Visual and performing arts such as dance and music are ways to share experiences that go beyond words. So I think that that's the serious way of talking about what I'm doing. But also, it's so fun. I have enjoyed performing for an incredibly long time, since practically as long as I can remember. And I get a great jolt out of getting an audience response while I am performing. And even in my serious talks, there's a lot more laughs per minute usually than there are in a lot of other people's regular talks. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great, I think Annie, with Depths of Wikipedia, you have almost become, I mean, you've become well known. You've become a writer, somebody who the media talks to on this stuff about bringing.
Yeah, which is very silly.
I mean, you have to be able to laugh about it, right? I mean, so I'm I was about to say an ex-Wikipedian. I am very much still a Wikipedian. I just don't work for the Wikimedia Foundation anymore. It's funny. I mean, I think Wikimedians have a very well-developed sense of humor, in jokes amongst themselves.
Yeah.
You're maybe one of the first people to bring that to a broader public awareness, right? Because I think the stereotype of Wikipedians is that we're like dry nerds who,
right, like persnickety librarians enforcing a bunch of rules, which it sort of is, but also I think people don't always understand that there's like a lot of young people, a lot of really goofy people. There's like wiki projects that connect people. You can like send the wiki love, and those are like very, very small examples of the community. But also there's like discords. I talked to a college freshman in the Philippines who's like, oh yeah, all my friends are from all around the world because there are people that I connected with during quarantine on Wikipedia. And so he's friends with like Tavi, the guy who's like a Scandinavian teenager who maintains like the login system, making it, I forgot the name of it, but OAuth login system or something. There are meetups in the New York Times. Stephen Harrison wrote an article about one of the people who writes a lot about New York City subway stations. And he was a teenager or maybe early 20s, but he had this quote like, oh yeah, editing Wikipedia kind of gives me the same rush as playing a video game, but instead of winning a high score or anything, that you're putting information out there for everyone to read. And I'm butchering the quote a little bit, but yeah, I do think that it's definitely fun, and there's lots of kooky personalities.
Oh yeah.
I gotta say, when you mentioned the feeling of like people socializing with each other, right? I remember, more than a decade ago when Lewis and I both worked at the Wikimedia Foundation, there was an editor motivation study, right? Where we found out that really quite a lot of contributors to the various wikis, this was one of their major forms of socialization. And you see that in the talk pages and the various discussion for it. And now off the wiki as well. I remember the learning how to feel that way about one of the first open source projects that I got really, really into, which was the GNOME desktop environment. Where, the desktop environment, in a way, it's a very intimate thing, right? Every time one uses a desktop, there's all these, windows and icons that are right there as part of just the environment of your work and possibly personal life. And I remember realizing, every time I look at this feature or that feature, or even sometimes when I run into a bug, I would know, oh yeah, such and so made that, I remember when she added that feature. Oh, I know he's working on that. And I felt like my community was there with me every time I opened my laptop lid. And I remember saying that trying to develop on a closed platform is like trying to fall in love with someone who won't talk to you.
I mean, that emotional feeling is very real. I mean, Annie, what's, I mean, you've correctly pointed to others, but for those who are not familiar, what kinds of stuff have you been doing to, I mean, or how did you get started with communicating out that, like, hey, Wikipedia can be pretty funny?
Okay, well, I don't have that cool of an origin story. Mostly, I just like made a few one-off edits throughout my adolescence, you know, fixing typos, adding people to my high school's notable alumni, which I never like purposely vandalized or anything. Um, and then, but I was a little too scared to do big edits because I had seen the talk pages. People were always linking to bizarre acronyms, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for all of that, but I can definitely, like, you know, fix this comma splice. Then I started spending more time reading Wikipedia, like the list of unusual articles, stuff like that during quarantine, posting them on Instagram. Just became like, I just was screenshotting, posting. My summer research job got canceled because of COVID. Just spent more time on Wikipedia. I worked at the night shift at a nursing home in the COVID unit. And when there were patients with COVID, they also had dementia. So sometimes they were very confused and it was very busy. So then I did not have time to sit around. But other times it was the best job ever because if no one had COVID, it was just me sitting in the back, being there ready in case somebody got COVID. And so lots of times I would just sit in this like very dismal looking nursing home office and like go on Wikipedia and post trivia. So anyway, for whatever reason, the Instagram account kind of took off. I started posting stuff on Twitter. Then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm such a fake fan. I only edit for typos. I only had a few hundred edits, and they were all very like small. So then I got more into it and I started like writing articles. I still am not that big into like, some people are so passionate about like having discussions that shape the future of the site. And I still think that's cool. And sometimes I'll like, you know, do that. But what I think is a lot more fun is like content editing, updating old articles, sometimes removing articles. So yeah, I really like content editing. And I think that there are all sorts of Wikipedia enthusiasts out there that are on the internet, on social media, that have not taken the leap to become contributors. And it's very easy to convince them to, like, you know, take the leap. So it's been fun to do that.
I mean,
And I'm
it takes
also like, I'm 20, I just turned 23. So I just graduated from college.
so, I mean, does that mean you have more time on your hands or less time on your hands?
Congratulations, by the way.
And
Oh, thank
congratulations.
you. Thank you. I don't know. I like feel like I have less time on my hands because of, you know, like working at a job. I was working 20 hours a week at a climate job. I was kind of mentioning this before the recording started, but I recently got a book deal to write about funny stuff on Wikipedia. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for the claps. So I will no longer be working at the climate nonprofit.
That's
And Sumana was saying congratulations for fixing climate change. I'm all done. I did it.
Sounds like
yeah.
it.
I mean, we will actually have some guests talking about open and climate in upcoming episodes of the podcast, because I do think there's some really interesting stuff to say about that. But it is maybe not on the more fun side of things. There's certainly plenty of grim news there these days. But I mean, I think that's, you know, even the folks. My favorite, I mentioned this to you, Annie. I've mentioned this to a lot of people over the years. One of my favorite Wikipedia articles is toilet paper orientation. And this is an article that sounds utterly silly and is utterly silly. And I have never wanted to look into detail into like how this was written, because it would sort of spoil it for me, right? It's got like 200 citations. It has incredibly detailed historical references, drawings, pictures. It's almost like a pitch perfect. I've always assumed, and again, I don't act. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to know. I almost think it was written on a dare, right? Like two Wikipedians, like, I bet you can't make a good article about toilet paper orientation, and somebody else saying, I bet I can. Because it is just pitch perfect. Like, it has that Wikipedian tone and style, and yet is, of course, utterly absurd because it's an encyclopedia article about toilet paper orientation. And I think there's something that that article tells you about. Similarly, for a long time, there's some great articles about the heavy metal umlaut, and which is now just the metal umlaut because somebody decided in a very Wikipedia name that there was no evidence for it being called the heavy metal umlaut except on Wikipedia. You know, there's something about that, the way the Wikipedia lets you work on both very serious stuff, right? Like the folks who write articles about climate change are, like, no joke, heroes of the modern age. But yet also you can find the time or the energy, or at least the person who wrote the metal umlaut or the toilet paper orientation, right? There's something about that community of shared, I don't know, both shared seriousness and also shared joy, right? I mean, Sumana, we've got plenty of examples of this. Well, maybe not plenty, but I remember this was a conference that I think you were at, that After Hours had a dramatic reading of bug reports.
Sure.
And with live piano accompaniment, right? And it was, we were able to find it was a social lubricant, right?
I've definitely, I've in my stand-up, I have read aloud, less productive emails I've received. That made various accusations towards me that I disagree with. Being able to kind of compost the gross stuff into something fun is one of the things that, I think Annie's work and my work can have in common, because I'm sure, Annie, sometimes what you're pointing at is not just, oh, look, this is just pure fun, but there's like a context to it that takes a gross thing and makes it fun.
Well, I think it's just like when you mix highbrow and lowbrow, sometimes that's funny. Like if you're on a stage presenting at a conference and you do something like silly, then there's humor in that. Or if you have this like very buttoned up encyclopedia that's known for like having a formal tone, and then it's discussing sexually active popes, that's funny. So I think that is great. The thing that you were talking about with the dare of like, hey, I dare you to write an article about toilet paper orientation reminded me of something that I just heard about. And there's a Wikipedia like policy page about red links. And so if something perhaps deserves an article but doesn't have one, you'll still link to it, but the link will be red because the page doesn't exist. On the like policy page about what is a red link, they have examples of red links, but the problem is that they have to update that example all the time because people see the red link and they're like, oh, easy peasy, let me just quick make that. So I was just looking, it used to be history of the Jews in Arizona. Somebody made an article, so now it's elections in the Canary Islands. And so if you want a Wikipedia article to get created, one of the best places to put it maybe is the the Wikipedia red link article.
I bet if you looked at that over time, it's gotten progressively more obscure, right? Like whoever put that in first, it must have been that's amazing. Annie, this depths of Wikipedia, I think one of the things that blows a lot of people's mind is also the breadth of Wikipedia, right? That it covers so many different things. Do you ever play with that or see?
Well, yeah, I mean, I found an article yesterday, feral parakeets of Great Britain, something that I supposedly like could have realized was a thing, but would have never actually thought about if there had not been an English Wikipedia article about it. But yeah, there's like, I think 6.6 million, maybe now I can round up to 6.7 million articles in English. And that's just English. There's like, what, 300 something languages? Sorry, Sumana wants to talk.
Yeah, okay. I think I noticed a thing you did there where you said there's an English Wikipedia article about it instead of just saying there's a Wikipedia article about it, which is also something I do to try and subtly remind people that there are hundreds of Wikipedias in lots of languages. Is that what you were doing there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that if you're just like, Joe Schmo from like Ohio or something, you may not know that there's a Wikipedia for more languages than there is Google Translate for.
Yeah, I mean that's something that that's and each of those, for listeners who are not familiar with Wikipedia, each of those languages has its own set of rules and its own cultural norms around what is an encyclopedia article, what's an appropriate way of
Their own
approaching
design,
Wikipedia.
even like if you look at like French Wikipedia, that looks different a little bit.
That's yeah.
Oh
It's
yeah,
really interesting, and I mean I know that the policy stuff means that. Well, okay, so I think of like the Wikimedia properties, as it were, you know, the Wikimedia sites as like a giant archipelago, you know, and that means that new innovations can sometimes start in one place and just stay there until someone else looks. But also it means if there's harm happening, then some of the islands are more affected than others, and some of them kind of have a heads up, like, oh, this is happening over there, and we have a moment to like prepare ourselves before it gets here. Or we can say, nope, nope, we're not going to let that thing happen to us. Actually, maybe on a policy level, maybe on a, you know, institutional level. So that's a, you know, a strength, and also it slows down change across all the sites, which is good and bad.
Yeah, there's some real challenges there, though. I mean, some real, like you say, it does allow. Well, I mean, certainly some of my favorite moments of humor are when you try to explain that to somebody who's trying to work with all of Wikipedia and
Oh
is
boy.
not the look of sheer horror on. I once had a conversation with somebody about. They're like, well, I need to understand how to like use software to extract citations, and I'm like, well, there's 7 different citation formats on English Wikipedia. And then on German, there are like 12. And they're like, what do you mean? They're separate. They're different on German than in English. It's like, oh yeah. And they you could just see them like this cool idea that they had. They just got progressively more crestfallen. They did eventually implement it, actually, which is great. But I want to, you know, I think that one of the things that I wanted to talk with you both about, I think particularly you, Annie, there's this communicating that culture to people who didn't fall into it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, you've been doing live stage shows about this kind of stuff. Do you ever talk to people afterwards? Uh, do you think they leave with a better appreciation of what Wikipedia is if they're not Wikipedians themselves?
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of the goal. I mean, I am not, you know, like I just care a lot about Wikipedia. I would never promote vandalism, but I do try to get people to laugh. I think that like some of the inside baseball type jokes that Wikipedia editors have with each other, they sometimes think that they will translate well to like a layperson, and they really just do not at all. Like puns about an acronym or something like ANI, like that people don't care, you know. But other things, I think like yeah, like joking about how much people can care about something that's really silly, like whether to name the article corn or maize, and some of the arguments that come up in that. That's kind of like always funny because it's like, oh, there are people that care about something that I've never really thought about. But now that I'm reading these arguments, I kind of care too. So, wow, it just really illustrates something about human nature, which is that we can get ourselves to like feel very passionate about really dumb arguments. But what was the question? Oh, do people leave with more appreciation? Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I think they do. I like often will poll the audience to see if people edit Wikipedia, and I am perpetually surprised that most people don't. Most people have never made an edit.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people don't even realize they, or at least back when I was at the foundation, 2011 to 2014, most people didn't realize they could, right? When we thought about how to get more people contributing in any way to the sites, including uploading photos to Commons and things like that, right? There was this idea of the -1 to 100 project where we wanted to get more and more people to the state of having made 100 distinct contributions to the site. But they had to come not just from 0, which is having made none, but -1, which is the state of not even realizing that you could, which probably the vast majority of humans who have ever interacted with Wikipedia, English Wikipedia or any of the Wikimedia sites were at that stage and probably still are. And so getting them to, oh, I could edit, and then getting them to their first contribution, and then getting them past that, were distinct things that needed distinct interventions on social, on interface, on backend, all these different fronts.
Yeah, Annie, I want to pull back to something you were saying. I mean, Sumana, we could go into the like how you make those transitions is a whole thing in both open source and in Wikipedia. But there's something, Annie, you said I would never encourage people to vandalize.
I'm so sorry, you cut out a little bit because my mom called me.
Oh. Well, I was just, say hi to your mom.
I hung up. I said no. I said, Mom, I'm busy.
Now I sort of want to ask what your mom thinks about your interest in Wikipedia, but let's put a pin in that one. You were saying, hey, I would never encourage people to vandalize, and I feel like there's this Catherine Marr, who's the ex-executive director and a friend of mine. I remember her a couple of years back tweeting there was some particularly funny vandalism, and it was and she like tweeted about the particularly funny vandalism with a like, vandalism is very, 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 very bad, and also this is hilarious, right? I feel like that's one of those, like, the funny vandalism is almost like a gateway drug to the funniness of the rest of Wikipedia, right? Because it's something that we've all seen passed around on social media, and it's almost ritual now, right? Like if somebody wins the sports championship, the key players or coaches get vandalized in hopefully funny ways, though that particular joke is played out. I don't know. What do you think of do you ever use again, you're definitely not encouraging vandalism. All of our readers out here should know, all of our listeners should know that you should definitely not vandalize. But are there funny vandalisms that come to mind, or?
I mean, I just don't think they're after cleaning up vandalism a lot, I just don't think it's just like the same joke. And like, I don't know, people sometimes point out, like, someone put Paul Ryan on a list of like spineless or like invertebrates or something like that. Like, I don't know, that one was a creative one. But ultimately, like, I don't know. I think I'm too much of a cop of vandalism to like laugh at it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I used to laugh. I used to think it was really funny. There's this one Twitter account called Wikipedia, but I made them up, where they just like completely like take the Wikipedia template, but like butcher all the content. But they don't actually vandalize. They're just doing that in Inspect Element. And so, to me, I think that's kind of funny. Like, they did a title, and it was like I am going to die disease. And it was like, I have a little mosquito bite on my ankle. That was the whole text of the article. And so just like using the format of Wikipedia, but like basically just having a joke. To me, that's funny. But
right,
actually,
so like fake, yeah, fake wiki articles. So we have had. So I read a lot of sci-fi, and so we'll see, like, in the sci-fi space, especially, people write fake Wikipedia articles, fake encyclopedic articles as a form of story, right? There's a somewhat famous one called Lena, about the first mind ever to be uploaded as like a human AI thing. There's a number of, like, in the sort of epistolary form, right? Like, there's this grand tradition of like fake primary documents, fake documents for a fictional world. This is one of those. You see, I think there was a fake, like, a fictional wiki article about time travel, which is obviously a really hard thing to like write an in a world Wikipedia article about. Like, okay, how do you deal with verb tenses and things like that? And those, like, they're playing on our understanding of, like, Wikipedia as this social construct that we are all familiar with, so they can piggyback on that, like fan fiction, right? And then but they don't obviously actually hurt people who are using Wikipedia, because they don't vandalize, right? It doesn't interfere with people's desire to be able to depend on this infrastructure of knowledge. It just plays on it the way that fan fiction, for most people, does not actually interfere with their understanding of the canonical work. I was going to say something, Lewis, about when you said, okay, we don't encourage people to vandalize. I have a, like, back of my head hypothesis, and Annie, I'd like to understand what you think about this, that, to a lot of people who have never had a person like you encouraging them to edit, the act of editing is itself transgressive, right? It's not a thing they feel encouraged to do. They feel like they're breaking in already. They feel like they're breaking in by editing at all. And so vandals are like you're just going to get more vandalism that way, because the only people who feel like they can edit are people who are okay with breaking norms anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And somebody named Megs, the head of Wikimedia NYC, a couple months ago, said something like that. Like some of the best editors are reformed vandals. Also, I think the whole hacker ethos that really dominated Wikipedia in the early days. I wonder how much that still lives on, because when you're a new editor, you have to follow like pages and pages of norms and guidelines, and some of them are so important that if you break it, you get blocked, and others don't matter at all and no one follows them, but it's written on some policy page somewhere. And so navigating that is kind of hard, and you really have to be like, you can't be afraid of making a mistake if you're gonna contribute. Something interesting is that Jorm, Jorm, who has a real name too, but I'm forgetting it, but his Wikipedia username is Jorm. He was saying that people like with various degrees of seriousness have talked about inserting typos into Wikipedia specifically so that it encourages new editors, which is interesting.
I remember someone mentioning that on Foundation L or Wikimedia L. I could look it up and figure out who it was, but it was someone who was like a board member, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the challenges is that it is seen as this perfect is too strong a word, right? But it is an essentially serious thing. And I love this notion that like you actually have to see it as a human approachable thing. And I think
you get over your edifice complex, right?
Right. Oh, I wasn't sure if we could get all the way through this without one terrible pun. Yeah, I mean this notion that everything we do here is extremely serious. I mean, it's good in some sense, right? I mean, it helps us get credibility. It helps us be seen as a resource that's actually trustworthy. But yeah, then of course it is. I mean, if Wikipedia is this like thing on a hill that only you need all the credentials, you need all the knowledge in order to edit, you need to sort of pierce that balloon a little bit, right? And certainly, Annie, I think that's what for a lot of old-time Wikipedians, I think what a lot of us love about what you're doing is that it does make it visibly human again, right? In a way that
there's an administrator named Sammy whose Wikipedia user page says something like, "Hey, welcome to Wikipedia. Glad you're here. Like Wikipedia was created by like people just like you and me, or Wikipedia was created by a bunch of people just like you." And the "just like you" is in italics. And I remember seeing that and being like, just like my whole like physical comportment changed. Like I was like, whew. Like, okay, good. It's not just like, I don't know, like IQ of 200, like crazy, like rule abiding people. It's just real people. Yeah.
Some of whom, as you pointed out, do really like rules, but all of them also like, there's a society of stroopwafel addicts. Stroopwafel being a sort of like cookie, I guess, for
yeah. No, and but they like rules to like a normal extent. Like it's like you can work with it. It's not too crazy that you can't add.
Right.
So that aspect of like the emotional vulnerability, right, of thinking I am a person who could contribute to this, and of going into this unknown gauntlet, right, of, oh no, what if this thing that I made isn't good enough? What if the people who review it are not just critical of the work, but critical of me, right? What if they're contemptuous of me in a really hostile, exclusive way? Annie, I think you should do a play about it. Because I did a play, I co-wrote and co-presented, co-started a play called Code Review Forward and Back. That was about a very similar dynamic of different ways that people in a software organization could be when they review each other's code, and which is a very, again, like an intimate moment of like vulnerability. And you could be helpful, you could be contemptuous, you could be unsupportive in that, no, I'm sure it's fine, wait, which is not actually supportive. Laissez-faire can actually set someone up for a worse failure than, proper criticism at the right time, et cetera, et cetera. And so we showed not only what those moments can look like, but also what the long-term effects are by showing sort of these flash forwards in the future of, well, what situation are these people in if they made these mistakes in the way that review happened earlier? And that conveyed to a bunch of people what it's like from both sides, right? Including people who it was a long, long, long time ago since they last had their work under the microscope kind of for the first time. And I remember someone said to us, oh yeah, I used to be that guy and I'm trying not to be anymore. Stuff like that. So if you wanted to kind of present both sides of that, I think something like a play would be a wonderful thing to do.
Well, now we know what you're doing next after the book. You're going to be off Broadway.
All right. Playtime. I don't know. We'll see. I remember there was a Wikimania where they had like a puppet show sort of thing with like talk page debates or something.
Excellent.
Kind of reminds me, I was at the ACPT, American Crossword Puzzle Tournament last week, and they have a parody song every year apparently about crosswords. Unfortunately, I was boozing a bit the night before and missed it. I shouldn't admit that. Here, but
no, I think actually that's
that's another thing. Wikimania is like, I'm always astonished by how many different people have said to me, the Wikipedia community, the Wikimedia community, when they get together, there's such a party atmosphere. Like, people are like throwing back shots at Wikimania. It's definitely very fun.
Oh, I mean, Sumana, I don't know if you've attended any weddings at Wikimania. I think I've only attended one.
I don't know if I've had a chance to attend any weddings at Wikimania. No. And every time that I went to Wikimania, I was part of the Wikimedia Foundation, which, that there's a particular level of propriety there, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Speaking as a former deputy general counsel, I would not know of any rule breaking that went on at such events. But yeah, I mean, I think again, this question of humanness in all of it, right? Yeah, people they party, they have fun, they get married. People definitely bring kids, right? They're like, this is my wiki baby. I met, my partner at a Wikipedia event of some sort, and now we have a wiki baby. Like, that is a very real. People fall in love. People, I assume, get divorced. I can't recall any such stories off the top of my head, but
I can. But
the ultimate deletionism.
But yeah, you were. I don't know if you want to tell that story or not, but
I definitely have heard a story of a Wikipedia divorce. But I am not. I just don't think that's my story to tell on a public podcast. So,
I think one thing that we've been sort of edging around here, right, is that these are coding and writing Wikipedia are human pursuits. And so they have all of the human foibles, and you have rule making and you have rule breaking, you have weddings, you have divorces, you have babies, you have deaths, right? I mean, the club of people who has attended every Wikimania get smaller for health reasons, not just because of other things, and people mourn those passings in a very real and human way. And I know, Sumana, one of the things that you and I have talked about some over the years, and Annie, I guess you're about to become a participant in this to some extent, is this question of how do we present these things in popular culture, right? So Sumana and I are both fans of this book called The Bug. It's a novel by Ellen Ullman, and it's a novel about a programmer dealing with a bug, debugging a bug, the stress that it causes them, the how they take it home, how they can't get it out of their head, and the joy of finishing the bug, right? There's not a lot of that kind of culture out there, but I sense that it does more and more permeate, right? Like as the digital becomes more of our lives. And again, Annie, I mean, I think what you're doing is very much part of this, is like reminding people that it is human. And I think that's terrific. I don't know. I mean, and Sumana, I think you've thought about that one a lot. Anything you want to add?
I have. Yeah. So I have more been focused. I think, Annie, your work and my work is different in quite a number of ways. One of them is you make work both meant for Wikimedians and the general public. You're talking to, insiders and outsiders, you're doing that translational work. I'm really not mostly. Most of the stand-up and the, things like that, the plays and the zines and everything that I do, I'm assuming that I'm talking mostly to other people who are already in open culture, open source, open data, open hardware, open stuff in some way. I think that the translational work that you're doing, there is a great history of it in, like XKCD, Randall Munroe.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna bring him up.
Yeah, Randall. Ryan North with Dinosaur Comics, like this, the web comics of like the early 2000s. But before
this is just me bragging.
Yeah.
But I'm in a Zoom Jeopardy group with a bunch of web comics people, and so I play Zoom Jeopardy with them every week.
That's awesome.
And it's probably the highlight of my life.
That's excellent.
Very fun.
So I think so. I wrote a blog post a while ago, and I think we'll put it in the notes about what are like the missing stories in all this. When we do tell stories to the world, movies, shows, books, plays, songs that include programmers and programming, they really rarely speak to the joys and sorrows of our experiences. So many movies that have programming in them, really, they're just spy stories with extra typing, or people getting rich stories with extra typing, but they're not about the what it's like to make stuff and share stuff, really. And so I made a list of like, okay, what are some stories you wish that people would tell about programming that they would put? And Halt and Catch Fire is one of the closest I think there's been. I did not watch Mr. Robot. I've heard very good things about it, but or Silicon Valley, but Halt and Catch Fire is up there.
Well, I think like the emotions of programming, I would love if that was on the big screen, because I did like 4 or 5 programming classes in college, and I remember the first one. I was like, oh my gosh, I am the only one here who feels sad that my code isn't working. And then when it worked, I was like, elated, over the moon. And I was like, oh, I gotta tamper this down. Everyone in this library is very, they're just working hard. They're not really feeling anything. They're just thinking. But you have to feel things.
Yeah, Annie, I think there is a paper by Piaget I'm going to be pointing you to about bricolage programming now. Yeah, about just like an approach to allowing for the fact that, people have feelings and we should let those be present as we're learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely research on the impact of not letting those emotions into programming courses, right? You're not the only one who has felt sort of like alienated, but then you like get into like actual programming in the field, and there's absolutely this like, oh, what this horrible thing, I hate it, it doesn't work. And people use very strong language. There's actually a great paper the other day showing that code with more curse words in the comments was actually higher quality code. And the theory, they couldn't prove a causal relationship there, but the author of the paper was like, maybe it's just because the people who curse a lot in the comments care more. And you can't really curse in there's no, I mean, I guess the talk page maybe. For those of you who are listening who've never
edit summaries, people do that in the edit summaries.
Oh yes, true, edit summaries.
I think I would need to look this up. This is in the, I saw a headline about a paper once, kind of territory of, it's like a campfire story, but for us, for like educated people, the campfire story as well. I heard a headline about a science study.
But really it was watching a TikTok.
That like cursing when you're in pain really does reduce the amount of felt perceived pain. So, the pain of going through a programming exercise that you're very unhappy about, you got to put the pain somewhere. It's better to put the pain in the comments than to put the pain into bad code, right? So, how about, I want to ask about, Annie, whether conflict, when we think about the emotional negotiations around conflict in open stuff, I would love to better understand what mediums do you think we should be exploring? Like, what mediums aren't we using yet that we should use to help people understand that aspect of it? Whether it's like games, novels,
Okay, so you're asking what mediums should we be using to expose people to like open source conflict and discussion? Collaboration,
sort of to explore like what those experiences are like, so that whether it's reflecting to Wikimedians and open source contributors or to like the general public,
I don't know. I'm not a very good person to ask. I really like reading. I think that like cartoons are the best, like web comics, that cartoon sort of things. I'm just like a big, like Calvin and Hobbes brings me to tears quite frequently, or like The Far Side. So I love things like that really like boil down all these emotions into like 6 words and a line drawing. Yeah,
zines,
I don't know.
then, like the comic zines that people are doing now,
Yeah, I really like stuff like that. And then I know some people they really like fictional plays, or it's like what you were saying, like fictional plays or like musical numbers. I have never really dipped my toes into that sort of thing, but maybe that could be interesting.
I mean, Silicon Valley, I put off watching that show for a very, very long time because I just knew it was going to be too close to home. And it does, for better and often for like painfully worse, really capture a lot of the, and to their credit, they did. I remember talking with some friend of mine about, the second season of Silicon Valley is in part about startups suing each other and being sued by large companies. And I'm talking with a lawyer friend of mine about it. And he's like, oh yeah, look in the credits. I was a consultant on that episode. And it was like, he's like, yeah, I wrote some of the papers that are on his desk, and I like explained and I was like, what? But yeah, I mean, there is something I think about humor getting across. I mean, there's this one episode where one of the main characters is dating somebody else, and they and they're a great couple, and then they break it off because they realize that they use different code editors. And so it's VI versus Emacs, like that is literally and they were actually able to, I think, communicate that to normal people in a way that, I mean, of course it's exaggerated. And so I sometimes talk to people who are outside of our space. They're like, wait, but is that real? Like, do people really get in fights about like their editors? And I'm like, yeah, they really do. And there is something to that idea of communicating through other mediums, through humor. I mean, Annie, I think there's a cartoon called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal.
Yeah, so good.
It's so good, and it has been, and particularly of late, has been very much about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I think touching some sort of raw nerves about like, what is all that going to mean for us, right? For our humanity as the robots come and get us, or whatever, right?
In my stand-up recently, I said, when I was talking about the inflection point we're at with machine learning, I said it can be hard to come up with jokes about this that don't turn into nihilism or startup ideas.
Whew. I feel like that should just be the tagline for this whole episode. Um, yeah. And actually, on that note, we have been going for a while, and I do want to wrap this up. What is it that makes you? I want to end by talking a little bit about what makes you excited and optimistic about the future, because, like you say, so many ways to become cynical, become nihilistic in this space. But both of you two are uh, good at finding these silver linings, or finding this joy. What's the biggest thing for you right now as you look to the future?
Okay, I'm feeling really excited about the future because I just wrote an article about the teenagers who are like really big Wikipedians who may not be very forthcoming about their age. And so I've been on the phone with these like very precocious, very responsible, articulate people who are like, oh yeah, also I'm 15 and I can't talk until football practice is done. And then they're like, in between their college classes, writing about like, I don't know, like maybe they're like 18 years old and they're writing the article like indictment of Donald Trump, or the timeline of, or maybe it was the article glossary of COVID-19 terms that was written by like a high school junior who was bored during during online classes. The GameStop short squeeze, that was an article written by a teenager who was bored during online classes. I just think it's exciting because, yeah, sometimes it feels like Wikipedia's culture is so, like old and it's been around and it changes very slowly. But also there are all these like young people who are really excited and who are contributing a lot. So that is what makes me very hopeful about the future.
It's a hard one to follow up on.
I appreciate it. I think literally talking about the children are our future is it is hard to follow because they literally are. But also all of us of all ages, the tools that we have and our ability to make and use those tools to help each other, it does get better. And sometimes it gets better by leaps and bounds in a mycelial way, right? The zeitgeist around mushrooms is like everywhere right now, like in all these different sci-fi and fantasy like TV shows and movies, and around like the metaphors that organizers are using, the idea that we help each other in a rhizomatic way, where it is impossible actually to, as the Tumblr meme goes, you cannot kill me in a way that matters, right? And that feeling of, well, we can help each other in the most decentralized possible ways, and we have better and better and better and better tools to do that, I think that is something that helps me and gives me hope. There's a short story by Malka Older called Shared Data about data cooperatives and how they can be used by people as the rate of natural disasters increases and reaches more and more places that had been somewhat more stable when it comes to climate and weather. Our need to help each other increases, and our ability may increase also if we have and use the technology that many people are developing, and that leverage that I think can be less hyped than, oh, look, this big company raised a big amount of money from some other entity with money to make an ad thing. Like that gets hype, and oh, like there's this way that people can decentralizedly share information about resources that they could use to help each other. That's getting less hype, but it's there, it's growing. A lot of people are working on those tools and using them to help each other. And we're envisioning with things like fiction, like Malka Older's short story, oh, how can we do that? In that design fiction, think tank fiction way. And I like to believe that the narrative fiction that I contribute to makes like the tiniest amount of difference there as well. I gave a talk through the GitHub office of the CTO a while back that was also like, here's three fictional composite scenarios of how we could do better, how open source could be healthier in the future, right? I think so. I posit some ideas and I'm like, well, here's what it might take. Here are the tools we need to develop, social tools and digital tools to get us from here to there. So that collective imagination and the work that is, inspired by it and inspires it, like that is a very complex thing to say, but it gives me hope.
Oh, well, I mean, now I need to find some science fiction authors to invite on. That is that's a lovely note for us to end on, because I do agree with both of you that there's
And the children.
yeah, well, yeah, and the children. I mean, Annie, we had the occasional when I was on the legal team at Wikimedia Foundation, there was the occasional like, can we invite a 14-year-old to Wikimania? And we always did try very hard to work with parents and work with immigration and things like that, because yeah, it's very real. It is that passion. Some amazing, I mean, Molly White, who I had on the podcast recently, I first met Molly when she was probably 17, and
She became an admin when she was 16.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I met her because she was an admin, because we flew out a group of admins to the office to like have, I think it might have been the first face-to-face like admin only meeting. And yeah, and even then her energy jumped out, right? And it's awesome to hear that there's another generation, and that they are, I think hopefully we're leaving them with some tools, both emotional and technological, to keep doing that kind of stuff. So thank you both so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing more of both of what you do in the future. So
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.